Hi guys, it takes a little more than screws, wood and ticky-tacky to build a cat house. A little gloop for the calories is also required. Shovel it in and on with the build. I heard the news today. Oh boy.
Chinese authorities have changed the ending of a Bible story. The adjustment claims Jesus is a sinner and even that he killed a woman. This as China is about to renew a deal with the Vatican. China and the Vatican are reportedly about to renew a historic deal. That's as a Chinese textbook has been found to paint Jesus as a murderer. In the original Bible story, a woman was about to be stoned for committing adultery, but Jesus stepped in, pardoning her sin and letting her go. But the Chinese textbook describes a different ending. It says when the crowd receded, Jesus stoned the woman to death, saying, "I too am a sinner. But if the law could only be executed by men without blemish, the law would be dead." The textbook is used by vocational school students, teaches professional ethics and law, and has been approved by a review committee under China's education ministry. The discovery comes as the Chinese regime and the Vatican are reportedly about to extend a deal. It was signed 2 years ago and allows both Beijing and the Pope to appoint bishops in China. China is home to about 12 million Catholics. They're split into two groups, state-run and underground. Pastors in the country's state-run associations are appointed by the communist regime. State-run associations reject the Pope's authority, while underground Catholics recognize it. But under the deal, the Pope has final say about the appointment of bishops in China and is recognized as the leader of the church. After it was signed, the Pope also recognized 7 clergies previously ordained by the communist regime. Some conservative critics consider the approval a sellout to the communist regime. The deal is about to expire next month, and U.S. is calling the Vatican to abandon it. In an editorial, Pompeo wrote that human rights conditions for religious believers have deteriorated amid the deal. He cited an example of a Chinese Catholic who was beaten and taken into custody for refusing to join the state-run church. On Twitter, Pompeo also wrote, "The Vatican endangers its moral authority should it renew the deal." He's expected to visit the Pope at the end of this month.
Just you within these walls?
Yes. Well, I've been bound up with affairs of this world, secure in the knowledge that you are taking care of the affairs of the next. See why my High Minister keeps asking me to come down here. Doesn't look like much.
The German inventor Gutenberg called it a printing press.
The Germans, only the Germans could have invented such a damnable contraption. Damnable, it's just a machine made in hell.
This machine
could topple the kingdom, your kingdom.
What's this? It's the first page of the book they were printing when we seized this monstrosity.
Liberty, a call for freedom.
With the press, anyone can become an author. Anyone's opinions can be as important as anyone else's. That is the danger. This isn't about political pamphlets. It's about the suppression of knowledge. Wrong. Wrong, sir. You are wrong. Knowledge is the true purpose of the church. Say what you really mean. Distribute knowledge to the masses more easily. Easy? Easy, Your Majesty. Easy is a trap.
When people no longer seek knowledge in our cathedral libraries, when it sits between the leather covers on mantles in every home, then it will have no value.
So, everyone will have books. Those books will be worthless.
An impassioned plea, old friend. But if cathedrals are the handwriting of the past, this press is of our time. I will do anything to stop its growth.
You will rescind your father's solemn pledge to support the church in the banning of printed books. Your Majesty, if we do not break the press, then nothing would be of value. I'm not such a fool. I will drag this country into the 16th century. And I will protect France against printed books as I have protected France against witches, sorcerers, and gypsies in the past. There are no witches and sorcerers in France. Exactly, Your Majesty.
There is a third version of the Jesus story which may appeal to the Roman narrative. Jesus and his entourage came over the hill, down into a town. They meet with a rowdy, self-righteous mob. The men in front are dragging a terrified woman by the wrists. The two crowds meet just as they reach a stoning post in front of a tall stone wall. The woman is crying uncontrollably as the men manhandle her and shackle her to the stoning post. Jesus asks what is happening. The crowd hush as one of the leaders explains. She is an adulteress. Adultery is a crime against God and man. For her punishment, she will justly be stoned to death according to God's law. What say you, preacher man? Is this not her just deserts, the evil temptress? Jesus did not immediately respond. He took out his scribbling stick, hunkered down into a squatting position, and started scribbling doodles in the sand. Erased them, and more scribbles. Maybe he was buying time as his clockwork figured out how to respond. He was put on the spot. As a politician, he would need a response to satisfy both crowds, his followers and the others. While doodling, he was aware their bloodlust was reaching a frenzy. Some were involuntarily hopping with itchy feet in anticipation of being part of the kill. Others were scouring the ground for better, more jagged and weightier stones to throw, while others again would scramble to pick up any stone discarded after others find a better one, having too many to carry. Some were curious as to the meaning of Jesus' scribblings. Eventually, he scratched it all out, stood upright, assuming an air that demanded silence. Just as well, by this stage, some of his own people had gathered the odd stone to partake in the sport. With outreached arms, in a loud and solemn voice, Jesus said, "My brethren, look within your hearts. Have you never sinned? Are you? Eyeballing those who looked upon him, raising his voice still louder in defiance. If there is one amongst you without sin, let them cast the first stone. The rowdy and disappointed crowd settled down to a murmur. People in the crowd eyeballed one another. Do they defy this statement and hurl a rock? Then it was thud after thud as they each despondently allowed their pile of missiles to fall to the ground. With heads down, they began to turn and disperse. Then a cloaked, hooded, and stooped old hag moved forward from the back of the crowd. She bent over and picked up a large boulder, went up to the poor victim, raised the boulder with all her might, flung it at the woman's head, splitting it open and killing her on the spot. Then the old woman turned to a flabbergasted Jesus. She lifted back her hood. What could Jesus do? He shook his head, probably feeling a little foolish. Addressing the old woman, he said, "Mother, sometimes you make me sick." I had to stop during this build to do a number of other tasks, including changing the fuel filter on my van, a rear brake disc and pads, just one set, fit Jubilee clips to the rubber gaiters at the CV joints. The original clips are just junk which only work for people who cut corners, i.e. most drivers here. The old fuel filter is clogged with dirt and had been for the last 3 to 4 years. The symptoms first became apparent in wet weather, not moisture or low pressure, more how it affected other people's driving. The lights would turn green. There may be 1 or 3 cars in front of you. They move off, I follow. Maybe they are front-wheel drive and their tires slip, or their clockwork tells them it's a wet day. They brake momentarily and then drive away at a slower speed. Driving a van being able to see over them and reading the road with no obvious cause for their behaviour other than those I mentioned. I decelerate rather than brake, and will only brake if absolutely necessary. The car behind me only sees my arse and doesn't need to be stressed by the erratic behaviour of the driver in front. I am at the minimum speed for the gear I'm in. The driver in front has got his act together and moves on. I am free to increase speed. I accelerate. I get a loud beep, a red light, and a message from the so-called computer saying, "Stop, injection fault." The computer puts the engine into a slow mode where it crawls at low speed. I ease down on the accelerator, slowly increasing speed. After about 10 seconds, the engine kicks back in and away I go. The message remains on the dash. Next time I start the thing, it clears, beeps at me, and a message to get an immediate service. That's that until the next time. Over time, the problem was getting worse. It didn't matter what the weather was like. Most days I would need to drive over a bridge, an overpass over the motorway, down a slip road onto the motorway. Upon reaching the motorway, there is a third lane which extends for about 1 kilometre to the next off-ramp. Many drivers will drive down the slip road until they are on the motorway at 50 kilometres per hour. Only after sliding into the driving lane of the motorway do they consider increasing speed. If someone is in the driving lane, they just expect them to move into the overtaking lane or brake. Not their problem. It's not always easy for someone to move suddenly into the overtaking lane, as more and more people have discovered that if they stay in the overtaking lane at about 20 kilometres below the speed limit with cruise control on, they have a clear lane ahead of them and can concentrate more on their phones. These people resent having to take off cruise control. When they suddenly become aware of cars or red lights ahead of them, maybe 1 kilometre ahead, they slam on the brakes, buying time for their clockwork to kick in. If the traffic ahead has slowed down from about half a kilometre from it, they put on their flashers, assuming the car behind them is an even bigger idiot than them. Other drivers, as soon as the third lane I mentioned becomes available, they immediately move into it, even though it is another kilometre to their turn off. They reduce speed to about 80 kilometres an hour. Many feel competent at driving at that speed. The same drivers will drive at 80 kilometres per hour in urban areas where the speed limit is 50, as this is their competency. Following media messages of speed kills or warnings of police crackdowns on speed, many drivers enter a motorway at even slower speeds. To counteract this, crossing the flyover to enter the slip road to the motorway, if there is a long funeral procession ahead, I will reduce speed to distance myself from the cars ahead, allowing me to match the motorway speed when arriving at that point. If I reduce speed to 40 kilometres an hour in 4th gear, and then accelerate down the hill on the slip road, the machine beeps and goes into slow mode, and the message, "Stop, injection fault." Going downhill, it is all okay again, and I am at the correct speed when I hit the motorway. Though this could be confusing for anyone tailgating me, though looking back, most just wish to reach their happy speed, way below motorway speed. I don't have a lot of faith in the so-called computer or its messages. The time clock on this van loses about 10 minutes a month. I don't bother resetting it and ignore it. It probably keeps proper time when the van is not driven. Badly written software. Gosh, I had no intention of talking about other people's driving habits. But water flows downhill, so go with the flow. I had a look online. The injectors on this machine would fuse aluminium to aluminium due to damp They could not be removed, and if necessary, it took an engine replacement to fix the problem. I had a look at mine, a later model, shrouded and sealed to about IP65, so not an issue. The solenoids looked good. I didn't even remove them or check the return overflow. I did, however, check and clean the electrical connections. Instead, I focused in on the fuel filter, which was the problem. After replacing it, the problem went away. What's the figure? 83% of Americans consider themselves in the top 50% of good drivers. I suppose that means 20 to 25% are bad drivers. These figures don't add up, but if others' avoidance actions behind a bad driver can get mistaken as bad driving, if someone on a motorway slows down significantly to rubberneck maybe a nice-looking house, or to show their passengers a donkey in a field, the car behind them, and the one behind that, the one behind that, and so on, have to brake or decelerate. In heavy traffic, this wave of braking travels backwards at 12 miles per hour. Motorists are discommoded and left quite puzzled as to why the traffic slowed down, maybe even to a halt, as they could find no obvious reason for it. Meanwhile, the dipstick who caused it all continues on his merry way, oblivious as to what happened behind him. There is a lot more to be said of driving habits, good and bad. Maybe another day. I was driving home the other day. The radio was on. I wasn't really listening, but caught the drift. Some guy, possibly a politician, was proposing a law banning drivers from smoking while driving, as it was dangerous. He reckoned people couldn't smoke and drive simultaneously. Seriously? If this guy really believes people are so dangerous smoking a cigarette while driving, and we need a law to ban and punish them if they do it, I can only question this guy's competency at driving. More likely, he has been told that smokers are a minority. Non-smokers are anti-smokers. The real and permanent government, secure and pensionable from cradle to grave. Their careers are effectively a communist model and a secret society. They facilitate a popularity contest every so many years, allowing the people to choose new tails for their departments to wag. In return for loads of money, they are supposed to fall on their swords if their department is caught screwing up. Else, it's a public relations role. They are also enabled to introduce some new legislation, another stick to beat the people with, giving additional powers and control to the real government. The politician gets to put something on their election pamphlet for the next popularity contest. Is this what democracy really is? Am I being cynical or just joking? Maybe. I suggest you form your own opinions. If I was to believe anything, it is that each of us should be afforded the dignity to form and express what we individually understand of the world as we experience it, without fear of reprisal. None of us has the right to impose or persecute others for not sharing our viewpoint. What is cynical is politicians imposing legislation on others, motivated solely for the furtherance of their career prospects. To think the camera on your device is being used so as to monitor your involuntary facial expression and eye movements as you watch and listen to stuff. Are our societies not disgusting enough, bad enough to be treated, not all, as animals on a farm, but to want to read our minds? Of course, biological bots have been doing this for years. Maybe George Orwell showed them a future that they could aspire to while preparing the rest of us for what was to come. I suppose I can thank my imaginary lucky stars that I don't have one of those Takata killer airbags, the largest automotive recall in history. Takata, a Japanese company, cheapskated, undercut their competition by using an ammonium nitrate-based ill-advised explosive to inflate their airbags. Moisture in the air means these things become more lethal after about 6 years. even the replacements, if they were old warehouse stock and correctly stored, will only buy an additional 6 years before they should be replaced again. 12 car companies bought these airbags, fitting them to 60-something million cars. Takata was sued in the States, with about a third of their financial assets going on fines, and 2/3 being paid over to the car companies to help cover the cost of a recall. Anyone with one of these vehicles is entitled to a recall, free of charge. I suppose the car companies are partly culpable for buying the cheapest component available from a company who beforehand was the cause of another recall, selling seatbelts made of brittle plastics that shattered, preventing the winding mechanism from locking when it needed to. I suppose we all have wondered at some time or other, would it be safe to have a tip and be punched in the face by an airbag inflating at 300-somethings per hour? That may be bad enough, but for you or a passenger to be shot in the face with a blunderbuss, causing disfigurement, brain damage, or blindness or death is not nice. The States and Australia seem to have got on top of the recall. In this part of the world, maybe not, and hardly the second-hand market. If you are a driver or regular passenger in a car, type Takata airbags into the Googleator to ensure you are not going to be unexpectedly shot in the face someday. ...